Okay, we're going to begin our presentation. I'd like to welcome everybody to the ISO 9001-2015 Critical Points of Review during the Transition Audit Process. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the Technical Director of Perry Johnson Registrars. A couple of technical notes. All participants are in mute. I would ask that if you have questions, to please make use of the question portion of the dashboard. We'll make time for your questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Overview of our topics. We're going to take a look at how PJR is going to be handling the transition for its clients. There's a few options that are open to you. We'll have a look at what additional audit time you will be faced with. We've got an expanded section, and I will also add in one critical place, an updated analysis of new audit content. We're going to take a look at kind of overall how is the audit of ISO 2015 going to differ from 2008, some concluding remarks, and then your questions. So let's begin with what we're planning to do in the transition process and how this is going to work. Our clients, we recognize that the time for transition is going to vary from case to case, and you're going to have each of you are going to be at a different point when it's time for you to transition. So accordingly, we are prepared to offer transition services pretty much at any point in your certification cycle. Now, our preference, and we would think yours as well, is to transition as part of your recertification audit for obvious reasons. Number one, the recertification audit already includes additional audit time. It includes, of course, the issuance of a new certificate, and it's kind of the appropriate point to kind of break from your 2008 certification and proceed with a 2015 certification. However, we do recognize that for some clients, perhaps some of you on the call today are going to be up for renewal in 2016, and you might feel that it's just a little too soon to do the transition. Well, we can definitely accommodate you either on an annual surveillance, if that is your current arrangement. We can also do 2 consecutive semi-annual surveillances. Now, in this instance, we can do consecutive surveillance, semi-annual surveillances, but the preference would be that the transition is handled in a single step. So if you're accustomed to having audits every 6 months, our preference would be to complete the transition in one step. Now, in both this annual surveillance and semi-annual surveillance options, for most companies, there's going to be a small amount of additional audit time. Now, that's going to vary from case to case. If you are on semi-annual surveillances and your preference is to transition on semi-annual surveillances, the additional audit time will be split between those 2 audits. Now, in both scenarios 2 and 3, what would happen is you would receive a revision certificate. So let's say that you're up for renewal in 2016. Say it's February 1st. You would receive a certificate reflecting an issuance in 2016 and an expiry in September of 2018. Now, obviously, that's not a full 3-year certificate. The reason for that, of course, is that September of 2018 is the last official date that ISO 9001-2008 is a valid standard. So that's as far out as PJR is permitted to go in terms of the certificate validity period. What would happen then is when you complete your surveillance audit transition, you would receive a revised certificate. It would still show issuance February 1, 2016, but it would bear a new expiry date of February 1, 2019, reflecting the full 3-year cycle. Now, in terms of the additional audit time that's going to be needed, we have internally, we've prepared a grid to help our team members calculate the additional audit time that's going to be needed. Now, the full measure of detail therein, of course, is confidential, but we can share the following details. For most of our clients, the average size client, they are going to be looking at an additional half day or 4 hours of audit time if they choose to do their transition as part of a surveillance audit. Now, there are going to be some companies that will be able to transition with no added audit time at all. Obviously, we're going to look at each situation individually. We recognize that for some of you, you may feel that the additional time is inappropriate and so forth. We're definitely prepared to discuss your concerns with you on a case-by-case basis. However, based on our calculations, what we know about the standard, we have concluded that for the average company, if they choose to do it over a surveillance audit, it will require an additional half day of time. Now, we have prepared a list, and we still feel that it's a preliminary list, although at this point this list has been reviewed several times by several key figures. This is the list of what is new and what will require verification during the transition process. So let's go through this. This content has been organized by section. And we begin in 4.1. Has the organization implemented a process to determine, monitor, and review external and internal issues relevant to purpose and strategic direction? Now, I want to hone in on the terms external and internal issues. 4.1 actually, in terms of the type of idea that it's trying to put across, it's very closely linked with section 4.2, which we're, of course, going to get to in just a second here. But the idea of external and internal issues, what that speaks to is the whole idea that a well-managed quality system is going to be aware, is going to be cognizant of the things that are happening both from outside, things that would come up from customers and suppliers and so forth, and things that come up from inside, things that are raised by employees, product issues, non-conforming product issues, new product development issues, etc. The whole idea that a well-run system is going to be aware of those external and internal issues and is going to ensure that those things are managed to the extent that they do not have a negative impact, so to speak, on purpose and strategic direction. And we're going to cover strategic direction especially in just a few slides here. Now, in terms of how this is going to be assessed, this is a high-level system establishment activity, and our expectation is that this will be reviewed through interviewing the leadership team. In fact, we've adjusted our audit report to have a specific question for this item. What else does leadership do to run its system? Management review, the issuance of metrics, KPIs, quality objectives, and so forth. So the technique for this really is not going to be new, but it is definitely a high-level item and one that as owners of the organization, as participants within quality systems, just getting used to this idea of external and internal issues. And as I said, there is a very deliberate linkage between 4.1 and 4.2. 4.2 asks, has the organization determined who its interested parties are? And the guidance in the standard in terms of defining what do we mean by an interested party, the idea here, again, is external and internal. And I've already kind of tipped my hand on who they're referring to. We think about customers and suppliers and so forth. What does it mean to be an interested party? Those within and those outside of the company. Now, again, audit time on this is going to be minimal. For most companies, it's in their best interest to know who their interested parties are anyhow. So, again, we would look to interviews with the leadership team and the review of documentation and so forth. And further, has the organization established a process to monitor and review information about the interested parties and identify what their requirements are? And this, again, this is going to incorporate existing methods. We're going to be looking at how do you interact with your interested parties. If we're talking about customers, this could be the contractual process. This could be the design process. If we're talking about your supply base, we would be looking at methods for purchasing and communication. I would suspect that websites are going to be a method that could be deployed. And again, a big part of this is going to be interviewing the process leads and interviewing the leadership team to figure out, okay, we have this new concept now of interested parties. What's in place to monitor their needs and to react accordingly? Section 4 also directs a review of the scope statement, and it says, is the scope statement appropriate? Does it take into account the internal and external issues? Does it address the needs of relevant interested parties? Does it accurately describe the products and services? Now, what we've done to accommodate this, we've expanded our audit report just a bit, and we've added a question directing the auditor to assess the adequacy of your scope statement. Now, for the vast majority of you, probably almost all of you, I see no issue with this new requirement and how it bears on your scope statement. The idea is that the activity of your system, the activity of the organization should be reflected in the scope statement. And the activity of the system should be rooted in these items, in the external, internal issues, in interested parties, and so forth. So I'm not foreseeing a lot of issues here, but it is technically a new requirement. 4.3 also tells us that exemption can now be sought for any requirement of the standard, not just those from product realization. This is kind of an interesting shift in idea, really, for the standard. And those of you that are presently certified to 2008, of course, I'm sure will recognize that in the past you could only take exclusions from Section 7, and the usual suspects, design, perhaps calibration if you didn't have any measurement equipment. 7.5.2 is a common exclusion if companies were able to verify their products through traditional means. What they're saying now is, well, the whole standard is up for grabs as an exemption. Now, in terms of real-world implication, we at Perry Johnson feel that an organization is going to have an exceptionally difficult time justifying, for example, we don't have to do management review, or we don't have to do internal audits, or we don't have to control our documents. So therefore, we choose to exempt those requirements. Digging a little further into the standard, just to give you a sense, I think, of why this was done the way that it was. There are some items, for example, in Section 7. Section 7 is where we have monitoring and measuring resources. That's the new placeholder for calibration. We would look at a section such as post-delivery activity. That's an item from Section 8. Most of the items that would likely be candidates for exemption are in Section 8, but there's a couple potentials in some other places. I have a feeling this is why this clause, this verbiage, has been written in the way that it has. Now, in terms of how this will be audited, our expectation is that any non-applicable designations will be documented and will be accompanied by a justification, just as they are now under permissible exclusions. The only proviso is that we can't demand that it be part of a quality manual, which of course quality manuals are no longer mandatory. Turning then to Section 5, we have the leadership section, and we've got three clauses, three subclauses really, that kind of ease us into an understanding really of how the standard views the role of leadership. And there's some interesting verbiage that's been written into the standard. Starting here with Clause 511A, where it says, has management demonstrated that it has taken accountability of the effectiveness of the quality management system? And the word accountability, I think, is key here. You know, the whole idea that the management team, the leadership team, has to take ownership. This is their system, and so therefore, when things go well, certainly take credit. When things don't go so well, certainly own up to your part of it and be an active participant in making things right. So, you know, how do we do this as auditors? You know, some of the key things that we would look at, you know, your participation in management review, your participation in corrective action, in complaint resolution. You know, are the members of the leadership team participants in these things? Do they join the group for the production meetings? Do they sit in on the rejected product analysis? You know, some companies have a special committee that meets to discuss non-conforming product once a week. Well, is leadership involved in that, and so forth? We certainly can't demand all of those things, but the expectation is that we can see that leadership is a participant and that they're making themselves accountable. 511B talks about aligning the quality policy and objectives with the strategic direction of the company. And this is actually an item that I just recently got some helpful clarification on. Those of you that have been past participants in this webinar. We've gotten a better understanding and a more, I think, clear understanding of what the standard is going for with the term strategic direction. Strategic direction is, it's a clause that's, it comes up in a few places. As a term, as a phrase, it's not officially defined. It's not defined in ISO 9000 or in 9001. And so we were, as users of the standard, we were, in a sense, left kind of to draw our own conclusions on this. And the original conclusion that we drew was that this was a tie-in to the fiscal aspects of the company. And we've since concluded that that was not the correct interpretation to take. What we now understand strategic direction to mean is it relates to an organization's vision of where they want to be in the future. You could also use the term mission in addition to vision as a way to understand the idea here. The intent is that your quality system, and in particular the goals that you've associated with your processes. That's why objectives are mentioned here. They should contribute in a positive way to the achievement of the larger mission of the organization. If you have a long-term vision of what you want your organization to be, your quality system should contribute in a positive way to achieving that vision. That's the larger idea behind the phrase strategic direction. Now, again, in terms of assessing this, we could potentially look at management review, business plan minutes, operational memos, interviews with leadership, and so forth. But the larger idea is strategic direction means mission. It means vision. 511C talks about, has management assured that the quality system requirements have been integrated into the business processes? Now, again, does this mean we're going to be digging into fiscal activities? No. Accounting, for the most part, has always been kind of a hands-off item in the audit process. So based on that, how would you assess this process? Well, there's a number of general things that the standard discusses where the business processes, such as they are, could benefit. We think about revision control on documents. We think about retention practices on records. We think about assuring the competency of business process personnel. These are all things that the standard promotes, where you can incorporate those ideas into your business activity. And that is how we feel this clause is best understood. Okay, moving forward then into section 5.2. Has the organization ensured that the quality policy is available to all relevant interested parties? Now again, I'll point out that the term interested parties implies both external and internal. So, in the past, I think it was understood but not fully implemented that the quality policy was something that was made reasonably public. For a lot of companies, it meant that you shared it with your employees, and that was the extent of it. Now the standard is saying you need to take some steps to make it available to all the relevant interested parties. Now that could be as simple as posting it on your website. That could be as simple as hanging it up in your front entryway. We will simply need to see that it's been made generally available. Has top management taken on responsibility for management of the system? This is in clause 5.3. And what this clause essentially replaced was the whole idea of the management representative. And this has been kind of a point of, I think, consternation for some of the folks that are transitioning. So I want to try to clarify what the standard is going for here. Understand that the owners of the system, right, the leadership team, they are the ones that are ultimately responsible for the success or failure of the system. And I think the framers of the standard felt that too often what was happening was a single person within the company, usually from the quality department, was given the task of management representative, and leadership stepped back and said, okay, we've got our management representative, it's on them, it's their job to get this ISO 9001 system implemented and to take care of it. And so the framers of the standard said, no, that's not what we intended by this. So they've eliminated the verbiage and they've said, okay, top management, this is your job. It's your responsibility to take care of the quality system. Now, this does not mean that you can't appoint a key contact. Obviously, for a lot of companies, It's good form to have a key person that calls the auditors to schedule the audits, that calls the corrective action meetings to order, and perhaps leads the management review meeting and so forth. But the intent, again, and I'll hearken back to that term accountability, we need to see that leadership is making itself accountable and participating in the system and running the system and not just dumping it all in one person's lap. 5.3b says, has management established a means to monitor if processes are delivering intended outputs? Now, this idea is not so new, but the way in which it's presented in the standard is a bit new. And so our assessment of this is that the existing analysis that we do on KPIs and objectives, this will be brought to bear to assess this requirement. And again, looking at management's participation in the corrective action process. Turning our attention then to Section 6. Section 6, of course, is where we find verbiage most prominently related to risks. Now, I do want to point out to all of you, the term risk appears in a lot of places in the standard. It is not unique to Section 6. It is mentioned pretty much throughout the standard itself. And so, again, the takeaway from that is you want to think of risk management or risk-based thinking, which is the phraseology that the standard itself uses. Is risk-based thinking an active part of the existing processes? The intent was never, does the organization have a special standalone risk management process? That's not the intent. In fact, it's been written into the annex of the standard that that's not the intent. So what are we expecting here? Well, we've added a question to our audit workbook, and we expect our auditors to ask about it. You know, what is your organization doing to be aware of risks and opportunities and to respond accordingly? And you know, we would look again at management review, at preventive action, at planning meetings, and other similar activities for proof of this activity. And we've instructed our auditors to be open-minded on this and to consider a variety of approaches. Now that dovetails, of course, into 6.1.2, where we talk about is there a process in place to address the risks that have been identified? And again, similar points of review. I would say that in addition, we would obviously be looking at your metrics and saying, you know, do you use your metrics as possible warning signs, right? Do we know that we react appropriately when the metrics go a certain way? Section 6 also has some requirements within it related to quality objectives. This one's kind of interesting. Are quality objectives relevant to both conformity of products and do they enhance customer satisfaction? Interesting idea here. You know, the quality objectives, to be truly meaningful, they need to be relevant to product conformity and customer satisfaction. Now, for the most part, I think in the years that I've audited, the quality objectives that I've seen meet this requirement. Now, you know, if you have a quality objective that is a bit removed from product conformity and really doesn't have anything to do with customer satisfaction, I would say that it's not going to be completely inappropriate to have such an item, but you must ensure that you have a sufficient number of objectives for your processes where this requirement has been upheld. So kind of, you know, if you feel uncomfortable that one of your objectives might not meet this requirement, just be sure that the rest of them do, and that they do so in such a way that your processes are covered. Now, in terms of how we're going to audit this, no differently. It's still an embedded part of our audit report, and we anticipate the action of auditing this to be pretty much exactly the same. Quality objectives are also explained a bit further, and it's stated that we have to assign resources, identify responsible parties, establish a timeline, determine evaluation practices, and so forth. Again, our current assessment methods for this will be utilized. And for most of you, I would say the methods by which quality objectives are reported will meet these criteria. You know, a lot of organizations have quality objective tables or grids, or it's an embedded part of a spreadsheet and what have you. As long as these data points are addressed, you'll be fine. Okay, turning our attention then to Section 7, there's a handful of things here, starting with the idea of organizational knowledge. Has the organization established a process to ensure that organizational knowledge is maintained and made available? Kind of an interesting idea, and there's an annex on this, and the general idea with organizational knowledge is that this is knowledge that is gained through experience. I'm sure for each of you, you have people in your company that have been there a long time, and when a particular question comes up, they are the only ones that can answer that question. You know, they have, you know, whatever euphemism you apply to it, tribal knowledge, or you know, that sort of idea. What the standard is trying to get across here is that the quality system should not be brought to its knees just because one person is out for a week or for a month or if they retire. That knowledge that person has, there should be a way of retaining that knowledge and making it available within the quality system. So, you know, obviously there's a lot of ways that we can do that. We can talk about training methods, we can talk about work instructions, we can talk about enhanced quality controls, we can talk about outputs from corrective action, we can talk about outputs from management review and so forth. But the larger idea here is that to fully meet this requirement, we want to try to flow down and retain the organizational knowledge as much as possible within your system. Now 716 goes on to say that you need to have a process in place to assess the changing needs and trends. You know, if an organization does not look at competency in the long view, right? You know, if you say to yourself, well, you know, we're good for now, that might mean that things are not going to be so good 6 months from now or 2 years from now and so forth. So the expectation here is that you're planning for the future and assuring that your competency base will be ready for the challenges ahead. Okay, turning our attention then to Section 8, we've got a couple of content items related to design, and these are going to be on the next couple slides here. And the first of these is, you know, if you are responsible for the design of product, do the inputs to design include standards or codes of practice that you have committed to implement? Now, even if you design products, some of these may not apply to you. You know, we already look at statutory and regulatory requirements. It's our conclusion that the term standards and codes of practice, I feel like that was introduced to help you have a more thorough understanding of what they're going for with this. You know, if you belong to a trade group and the trade group has requirements for its members that get flowed down for product design or performance features or what have you, those need to be an input to your design process, obviously. Now, for the majority of our clients, that even those that design product, it's going to be, I would say, dependent on how deep into the design are you a participant. Are you designing a single piece of a 500-piece assembly, or are you designing end-user products? I mean, obviously, those types of considerations will be taken in our assessment of this clause. And that also pertains then to the other new input, which is, do the design inputs include consideration of potential consequences of failure? Again, if you are only designing a single piece of a 500-piece assembly, you may not be able to speculate on that. You may not have any idea what the intended application of the final item is. Now, in terms of how we're going to audit this, we still are going to use the current methods for reviewing design. Most auditors like to review completed projects, obviously interview personnel and so forth. And you know, there's a number of ways that you think about consequences of failure, you know, safety, financial fallout, and so forth. Again, we're going to take this on a case-by-case basis. Section 8 also has some new requirements within it as they pertain to external providers. You've always been required to have a process for evaluation and reevaluation of your suppliers. The standard has added some interesting verbiage in 843E. It says that, among other things, you are supposed to communicate the intentions for review of external provider performance to the external providers. In other words, you need to make them aware of how you intend to monitor them and how you're going to monitor their performance. Now, obviously, there's a lot of ways that companies communicate with their suppliers. Could be purchase orders, could be contracts, could be terms and conditions on a website, could be a supplier quality manual, etc. But this is a point of information that you are now expected to share, and in some way, shape, or form. Section 853, again, relating to external providers. Kind of an interesting idea here. 9001-2008 had requirements in it, has requirements in it, that pertain to customer property. And of course, the expectation with customer property was that you would make your customer aware if such property was damaged or lost. You would have records and so forth. And there were a lot of obvious examples: customer furnished raw materials, customer furnished gauges, and so forth. Well, the standard has expanded that idea, and they've said, you know what? There are situations where property is provided by external providers, and why should the expectation be any different? It's still somebody else's property. So, you know, what are some examples of this? How might we see this manifest? One example that I came up with was, you know, let's say that you have a product that requires powder coating. That's, of course, a form of applying paint. And, you know, you've outsourced it, and you've decided you want to bring it into your facility. So you work with a powder coat paint supplier and draw up an agreement, and they install a booth in your facility for powder coating. Now the booth, because the booth costs $100,000, let's say, the external provider retains ownership of it. It is external provider property. And again, you can bet they're going to want to know about it if something goes wrong and their property is damaged. So in terms of how we're going to assess this, again, we're going to look at methods of communication and agreement between organizations and their external providers. And we expect that this clause will be of limited applicability in most cases. Section 855 has kind of an expanded list of post-delivery activities. These include statutory and regulatory requirements, undesired consequences associated with the product, intended lifetime of products and services. This is another limited applicability item. You know, for a lot of companies, there are very few, if any, promises made on a product once it's delivered. You know, there's no warranty implied, and so forth. Obviously, if there is nonconformity associated with the product, you would most certainly respond to that in the appropriate fashion. But the general implication of 855 is that, and there's even a note to this effect, that this applies to warranty, this applies to contractual obligations such as maintenance, supplementary services such as recycling, final disposal, and so forth. So again, we're seeing this as being of limited applicability. Section 856 is a large clause, and it's a new idea. You know, the whole idea of responding to unplanned changes. And our feeling is that, you know, for the average company, if something happens that was unexpected, most of the time it's something that is going to necessitate a corrective action. So that's one area that we would look to. We would almost certainly look to customer complaint resolution. We would look at production planning and so forth. What do you do to respond to unplanned changes to ensure that you are still putting out conforming product and taking care of business, so to speak? 856 also says, do you have a method for retaining documented information about those changes and who authorized it and what were the actions therein? And again, the documentation pieces are as we just mentioned. Turning our attention then to Section 9, we have some new content requirements for management review. There's actually 3 of these here. We're going to kind of go through these in rapid order, and then we'll kind of review our expectations. Management review has got 3 new required discussion points, inputs, if you will. Internal and external issues and changes therein, and the effects of those changes on the strategic direction of the company. And again, we'll recall what we talked about just a bit ago on what's meant by strategic direction. You're also required within management review to include discussion of external provider or supplier performance. And finally, you are required to include an assessment of risk management within your management review. Now, in terms of the methods for assessing management review, these are going to be unchanged. We are still going to be assessing management review minutes. We're still potentially going to be interviewing leadership, but we will have an eye out for these new content items. So getting to kind of a larger, more conclusive analysis on how will the audit to 2015 be different. We feel that there are 4 key items to focus on: risk-based thinking, documentation requirements, interested parties, and the expanded role of leadership. Let's talk a little bit more about how we're going to view leadership. We have added to our audit report a new section. It's a 4-question item, and the intent is that the auditor is going to sit down with the leadership team and go through these questions. So what kinds of questions are we asking? You know, what are the current external and internal issues? How do you participate in the quality system? How do you identify the needs and expectations of your interested parties? And really making sure that the leadership team is a participant and that they are able to speak to some of these new items. We've also, within the audit report, we've added a targeted review of risk management, and again, emphasizing that we don't expect a formal process. The standard does not expect a formal process. We are simply directing our auditors to ask about it and to be prepared to examine the various activities that have been presented by the auditee. We definitely presume that there's going to be several methodologies brought to bear: preventive action, competency planning, review of requirements, and so forth. Again, we have instructed our auditors to have an open mind. We do not have any preconceived notions or expectations as it pertains to documentation. We can no longer demand that you have a procedure for any particular activity. We can no longer demand that you have a quality manual. I will emphasize that if, as an organization, you conclude that it is beneficial to you to maintain a quality manual or to maintain one or more procedures, the content of those items is still going to be subject to audit. That part of it has not changed. Audit criteria is a term that's used, and procedures are, of course, admissible as audit criteria. So, if you have a procedures manual now and you use it and it's accurate, there's no reason at all that you should get rid of it if it's a functioning part of your quality system. Now, there is one new item that's actually rooted in the ISO 17021 standard, which also went through an update this year. We are now directing our auditors to specifically review statutory and regulatory requirements, and we've added a section to the audit report to accommodate this. Statutory and regulatory requirements are kind of a broad idea. It's been in the standard for a long time. I think we've seen limited assessment of it in the past, and I think that's part of the reason why 17021 is kind of forcing our hand, so to speak, on are you truly assessing this? It is absolutely possible that there will be no applicable statutory regulatory requirements, but we want to direct our auditors to start investigating and ensuring that if such requirements are placed upon you by your customers or by the industry that you serve, that some of those requirements are being assessed through the audit process. Now, in terms of how will the audit be the same, I do want to give you some assurance that you're not going to necessarily be, it's not going to feel like just a whole new experience in terms of how the audit goes. The key aspect of what we do on these audits is going to still be an assessment of your processes. And these are your processes to understand. Remember that element-based audits have been obsolete for 15 years, for over 15 years. And here at PJR, we transitioned to process auditing and completed that transition over 13 years ago. So your auditors should already be in the habit of assessing you against your processes. The methods of auditing are going to be the same. We're still going to interview people. We're still going to review the documented information that you have. We're still going to observe activity. We still need to learn about your process and confirm that it is under control. And you still need to be able to show us that you have fulfilled all of the applicable requirements of the 9001 standard. In conclusion, I just want to say that PJR is ready to ensure that you have a smooth transition. We are absolutely confident that for the majority of our clients, this is going to be a smooth transition with minimal difference from past assessment, and that you will benefit from the new requirements within the standard. I do want to invite you to keep in touch. We have an opt-in feature on our website. If you go to www.pjr.com, and at the bottom of the page you'll see a space to input your email and click subscribe. That will put you on the mailing list for any new webinars and any other relevant information related to ISO 9001 and so forth. Okay, let's open up the questions portion of the dashboard here and see what questions I can help you with. Okay. Can we get a copy of this presentation for our records? Yes, absolutely. Scott Gelston asks. Scott, we always make our webinars available for viewing and reviewing, and there is a link on our website that you can use to obtain a PDF copy of the slides. We can definitely accommodate you. Kartik Nevelli J. Kumar, I sure hope I pronounced that right. Clause 8.5.3, does this apply only if an external provider is on site? No, it does not. If an external provider has set up, in our example, a paint booth, and it's operated by company personnel, it's still their property, So that requirement would apply whether or not the external provider has personnel physically present. Okay, we're getting a couple of requests for the workbook questions, and if you'll bear with me for just a moment, I can get that moving for you. I'm definitely pleased that that there's some interest in this. So if you'll bear with me for just a second, I'm going to give you the exact questions as they have been rendered. Okay. Okay. All right. The leadership questions, and maybe what we'll do for future presentations of this webinar is we'll actually build these questions into the webinar itself. We require the auditors to make a record of who was interviewed. So again, the implication is, was it a leadership team? We ask, what are you doing to make yourself accountable for the effectiveness of the system? How do you participate in the system? And we then direct our auditors to provide a summary response. We ask, who are the interested parties of your organization? Do you have a process in place to monitor their requirements? What are some examples of current internal and external issues that you are attempting to address? And what methods do you have in place to monitor external and internal issues? So general questions, but questions that are going to direct, hopefully, expanded discussions and make sure that the concepts are well understood. And again, I think we will incorporate those questions into this webinar for future presentations. Okay, Walter Blocker asks, what are some assessment methods for future competency? Well, Walter, thinking in terms of how a company projects, how a company looks ahead. A lot of companies have ways of assessing what the anticipated production volumes are going to be. Who are the new customers that are potentially coming online? What are the leads that our sales team is presently following? And that's going to speak potentially to, based on where we are moving strategically and what we see on the horizon, is our current staff ready for this? So, I mean, we would look perhaps in, again, management review. We might interview the leadership team and say, is your staff ready for what's next? There's a variety of ways that could be accomplished. Okay, Miguel Juarez asks, could techniques for risk management be control plan or FEMA? Absolutely. That's one way to approach it. I would say, though, that bear in mind that risk-based thinking, as it is discussed in the standard, is intended to be a system-wide strategy. It's not necessarily just relegated to analyzing products. So bear that in mind. But certainly a FEMA methodology is a good way to do it, one way to go about it. Okay, James Haybecker asks, should a SWOT analysis be used for internal and external interested parties' risk? Again, I would say that is one approach that could be deployed, not mandatory, but if you can explain it and show it to your auditors that this is what you are doing to stay abreast of interested parties and their concerns and internal issues and so forth, I see no reason that could not work. Okay. Antonio Castillo asks, is there a clause applicable to services like 833D, or is only for product design? Antonio, the Section 8.3 speaks to design and development of products and services. And the idea is that, yes, for the most part, when we're speaking of design, we're speaking of product design, but there are also organizations out there that design services as well. So think of 8.3 and the subclauses therein as a general set of requirements for design pertaining to both products and services. Now, if you are referring to post-delivery type services, I would direct you to familiarize yourself with 8.5.5, which is post-delivery activities. Okay, Kartik Nevali J. Kumar also asks, how much of tribal knowledge detail would an auditor be looking for? Are we looking for extremely in-depth items? Tough question to answer definitively. For me, I think the way that I'm going to approach this as an auditor is, you need to ensure that if a particular person is no longer there or is not there for an extended period of time, that you are able to maintain product quality and maintain competency and maintain customer satisfaction. Think about it in terms of, is the organization absolutely brought to its knees when one or two people are not there? If that's the case, then there is probably cause for some concern that too much of the organizational knowledge is wrapped up in one or two people's minds and is not being flowed down to the company at large. I want to say to you that we're definitely going to take it on a case-by-case basis, and we're not going to be pulling out work instructions and demanding extensive amounts of detail. We're not going to be pulling out training programs and demanding extensive amounts of steps. It's going to be more a case of, like so much of what we do when we audit you, is what you're doing effective? Are you achieving your goals? Are you taking care of your customers? Are you getting good products out the door? With so much of this, that's really the correct way for this to be judged. Okay, Walter Blocker asks, can you share some examples of statutory and regulatory requirements that would or wouldn't be auditable? Well, just to pick something out of the air, let's say that you work in a governmental type situation where you have to ensure that your raw materials are domestically sourced. And so you have DFARS and DPAS requirements being flowed down to you. those are the sorts of things that we would probably initially see in either contractual or design documentation, and we would then be obligated to follow up on that, in this case probably with your purchasing department. There might be a requirement that is flowed down to you that pertains to the manner of packaging. You might have a requirement placed upon you from a local government jurisdiction that says you have to use recyclable packaging on your product. Again, these are things that we uncover when we review contractual data. These are things that we uncover when we look at designs and so forth. That's another potential item. Something that relates to OSHA regulations. These are also examples of statutory and regulatory. I would say that, for the most part, the ISO 9001 standard has never been intended to be a standard that looks at health and safety type issues. I don't think we would be ever, at least correctly, in a situation where we would be looking at fire extinguisher inspection tags or load limits on cranes and so forth. Doesn't mean that we can't look at those things, but typically we wouldn't be. Obviously, on a case-by-case basis, it's going to be different. In terms of where we would look, just to restate, and I know I'm repeating myself here, always start with the contractual and design documents. That's how we train auditors to identify these items, and look at what the organization has committed to do contractually, and in some respects in its advertising even. We look at websites, we look at advertising literature, we try to identify what are you putting yourself on the line for. Okay, any further questions today? Okay, well, I want to wish everyone a terrific holiday season. I appreciate you attending the webinar, and we will see all of you in the new year. Thank you.